The two biggest, most recent issues that I covered was the vandalism at the Islamic school in West Warwick last winter, and the more recent leaflet drop done in East Greenwich just about a month or two ago. The West Warwick Islamic school vandalism was somebody went to the Islamic school there and spray painted anti-Islamic stuff all over it, and they also did swastikas and other types of white hate symbols were put on there. Actually, swastikas might be wrong. It was what they call a sun cross, which is a cross with a circle. Mm-hmm. And that kind of stuff was done all over the outside of the school, which is targeting basically children. We're talking kids from kindergarten to, I think, high school go to this Islamic school in West Warwick. And it was done in the winter during really bad weather. There was a lot of snow on the ground. Somebody tramped through there during a snowstorm to do this type of vandalism. And it was a bit shocking, actually. Mm-hmm. Not long after that, there was a city councilman in West Warwick who was revealed to have made some anti-Islamic statements during a city council meeting. He later apologized for those, but that did show, to my mind anyway, that there was like this undercurrent of anti-Islamic attitudes going on in parts of Rhode Island that I don't think was previously looked at very seriously. More recently, the East Greenwich situation was somebody drove, again, during very bad weather, so this is kind of an interesting idea. It was raining really hard, weather was not good. Someone drove through East Greenwich throwing plastic packages with notes and rocks inside, waterproof, into the driveways or onto the lawns of various different people in East Greenwich. This was, and they were there was a white power anti-Islamic message. Well, a white power anti-Islamic message was attached, yes, definitely.
Well, let's see. We started out as anthropologists trying to decide in African studies where we wanted to go for our research, our doctoral research, and Richard was a little more interested in sub-Saharan Africa, and I was more interested in North Africa, so we selected Sudan, which turned out to be a very interesting case of Islam as a social system, especially embedded in Sufism, and then as a case that turned towards politicized Islam using Sharia, and probably one of the worst cases of Islam in politics that you could find. So luckily we taught for those many years, as you know, at Rhode Island College, and they have always had a very generous curriculum in general education, which allowed you to teach in your subject area and things that interest you. So early on I developed courses on Islam, through an area studies course on the Middle East, which I included, Africa as well, so North Africa. And then in our sort of critical area studies, a course called Arab Islamic Culture and the West. And so that I taught for maybe the last 15 years or more of our careers at Rhode Island College. And that was just a great course. Really engaged people, and there's a lot that we can talk about later on that we did with that, especially experientially by going to mosques and getting to know local Muslims and having them come into class and all of that. So it's just a great way to engage students, I'd say that.
Well, my exposure to Muslims was pretty early because my parents were active in the World Affairs Council and Center for International Visitors in different places, and we had Muslim, guests over for meals, and we'd spend the night from Indonesia and from different Muslim countries. And then I went to Africa the first time in '64, and Tanzania, especially the coastal part of Tanzania, is heavily Muslim, and so there were more direct experiences with the Muslim world. And in the same year I was in Egypt, so it was another time to be exposed to the Muslim world and to see it as a different faith with different people, different countries. My own religious upbringing was ranging from liberal to none, and we would often, in Sunday school, like when I was a teenager or less, we would study different faiths and so forth. So my roots in studying just accepting Islam for just being another faith was, pretty much from a very early time. And then, as Carolyn mentioned, we went to Sudan, which is a hybridized kind of country, both African and Arab and Muslim and Christian and so forth. Indeed, the quest for identity in Sudan as a political project, as a civilizing project from the Muslim point of view, was at the epicenter of the basically 3 or 4 civil wars which they've had, namely people who accepted that as their political objective and people who were opposed to it, to the inclusion of violence and civil resistance, military resistance. So we've been dealing with Islam, well, 55, 60 years practically for me.
Well, my journey to Islam was rather interesting. I was raised as a Catholic, but in New York City, where I was born in the Bronx. My mother was Catholic and my father was Baptist. But I think my mother's option or choice prevailed, so we, her children, I should say, were raised as Catholic. It was not until 1966 that I met someone, who introduced me to the Nation of Islam, and that's where my journey actually, began. And it sort of took time for me to embrace, the religion, because being raised Catholic, I obviously had questions concerning Jesus Christ, who, and of course, in Catholicism, believing in He being the Son of God. And so that was the beginning, basically, of my journey in Islam. And I became officially a member of the Nation of Islam in 1966, where I received my X. That was part of the sort of like the baptismal into the Nation of Islam. You had to relinquish your so-called slave name, and that was sort of in suspense up until the time that you were giving, as we thought, a holy name. And between 1966 and 1975, after the passing of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, is when that actually took place, and I changed my name in 1977, and with the help of the Director of Islamic Studies, and we adopted the name Fareed Ansari. And that was a whole nother journey, a whole nother evolution in terms of, I think my own persona as a person, as a Muslim, coming into the fold of Al-Islam, coming out of the teachings of the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, which was something of an aberration, as we look back and we later learned that it was not exactly the teachings of Islam proper. There was a great many of the slaves that came, that were brought here to America were Muslims.
We are working on our people. First things first, we look upon the so-called Negro in America as a sick man. When a man, you may say, well, what do I mean sick? If a man has forgotten his name, he's a sick man. They call that amnesia. And if you go to the so-called Negro here in America and ask him his name, he doesn't know it.
I think that is part of the teaching of going to the Nation of Islam. There's a connection between that slavery experience and having subjugated the so-called Negroes, or the Africans that they renamed Negroes, and the teachings of the Nation of Islam were geared to the so-called American Negroes who had been slaves. And I think it's really part of the spiritual DNA of the African American experience.
As we came here as outsiders so many years ago, we began to try to find, like-minded people or people who had international experiences like ourselves, and especially people who speak Arabic, because we learned Arabic in the field. And so that kind of naturally led us to many people from the Middle East who had come here, many African Muslims. And experientially, what I would do with those classes I described was that at least once or sometimes twice a semester, we would visit various mosques in the area. So we started going to the West End, Cranston Street Mosque, and then they changed locations, and we ended up with the mosque up in Manville in the end of Route 146. And that's a mosque which caters especially to Asian Muslims, Pakistanis, but also heavily Nigerian. And so that was a great place for students to go and have an experience of what it's like to go to Friday prayers, what it's like to be among Muslims. And I'd have to say in every case, the imams were very reaching out to us, were very glad for the visits, and typically after Friday prayers we would sit down and have discussions about what it's like to be a Muslim in Rhode Island. So there are actually a number of people who have taken this up as a kind of a research matter. A number of my students interviewed Muslims, what it's like, what kind of discrimination, what kind of positive experiences. And as you would know, we all know, Rhode Island is actually a very tolerant place religiously. And so there have been some cases that we could discuss, but generally speaking, Muslims report that they have had positive experiences. There are, of course, the negative, people who are ignorant or mistake Sikhs, Indian Sikhs. Anybody with a turban, has got to be Muslim. But that just really comes from a base of ignorance, and that's widespread in the society, including here. But the climate is actually one that is, at least Muslims report, is generally tolerant. And I do remember one case which stands out in my mind, where we were meeting with women with the women, men with the men, but then we would meet generally with the imam, where a Turkish woman who was wearing the hijab said that she had actually emigrated to the U.S. to have the right to wear the hijab, that this was banned on university campuses in Istanbul, and that she was prohibited from wearing it, and she came to America where they have religious freedom, which was a kind of a shock to our students, and like, wow, I never thought of it that way. But the point was made, even without soliciting it, by this woman who said, yes, I came here so I could wear the hijab.
To my mind, when I talk to people, remember I cover a progressive beat, so for the most part I don't deal with the extreme nativist, anti-Islam stuff. That said, for the most part, I see a very positive attitude towards Muslims in Rhode Island. I think it's encoded in our DNA here in this state to be receptive to people with different religious faiths and different ideas. There is a strong anti-immigration nativist element in Rhode Island. But when I write about them, I'm almost always told that they're cuckoos, or they're not. They don't speak for They don't speak for Rhode Island, so they seem to be outside. And I think that's just something you'll find anywhere. But for the most part, yeah. I mean, remember, Roger Williams specifically mentioned Muslims in some of his defenses of freedom of religion.